Hello and welcome back to the 001 Radio Gamescast, episode number 49. As always, I am your host Ryan, and today I'm joined by my lovely duo of co-hosts, Alex.
Why, hello, Ryan. Pleasure to be here.
And Wyatt. Wyatt? Wyatt?
I killed him. It's me
Oh,
instead.
I'm sorry. Wyatt appears to have been lost to the ether for this episode, which
He's
is
been
funny
atomized.
because this is actually one of the scenarios where we can do a story time for the opener, because Wyatt, we had to reschedule this episode to allow Brett to be here, but we had all confirmed that all four of us were good for this new day, and Wyatt suddenly had a meeting pop up last minute. Now, just 2 minutes ago, Wyatt has let us know that meeting got canceled. But unfortunately, we had already reworked the topic of this episode to be Wyatt's personal hell.
Which he did not want to be here for some reason.
So this episode, we will be going crazy and talking about all the things Wyatt doesn't like. JRPGs. Any game that isn't a AAA Western game.
Oh my god, dude. That's a deep cut.
This is why is he not here? This is the Comedy Central roast of Wyatt.
All he'd be
Come
doing
on.
is going, oh, every like 5 minutes.
Wyatt
He'd
would
just be so
pained
sad.
cries.
Oh.
Well,
And then
while he
the
can't be
occasionally, but I
here-
don't like that.
Yes,
It'd be great.
yes.
I would love it.
Hmm.
What was that, Brett? What did you have?
While he can't be here to suffer like that in real time, he could definitely come back and watch this. Honestly, literally, he could be listening.
He might be
right
watching
now.
right now, and it would be great. All right, and this does mean we will be resuming the Final Fantasy Tournament of Champions next week, on next week's episode. So that way we are all doing it in real time and having reactions. But for
Yes.
this week, this is a little game I would like to play with everyone. It's an award to give out, but it's also a game. And so I want us to come up with the Wyatt's Personal Hell Award. And this is a gaming-related thing that Wyatt would have to do. That would be his personal hell. Just deeply disturbing to him. Now, I think I can kick us off to give an example. Being forced to play every Final Fantasy game in order, start to finish.
Like marathoning them?
Yeah, marathoning the Final Fantasy games. I don't think Wyatt could do it, but I think he would. I think after a solid 5 minutes, and that includes the MMOs, both MMOs. So I want to see it. I want to see Wyatt try to finish Final Fantasy 15.
Saying something bad about Titanfall 2.
Oh, he would not be able to do that. I think he would probably die before he would actually legitimately let those words spill from his lips.
Mm-hmm. All right, Brett. What's your contribution?
I'm gonna kind of aping off the first example that you came up with, Ryan. Playing every Ace Combat game in a marathon.
He doesn't like flight games?
He loves vehicle combat. Loves flight games. Son of a pilot, come on.
I mean, he played Star Wars Squadrons for a pretty good amount. He could probably do Ace Combat.
I would
he
still
could
be
do
surprised.
Ace Combat. I don't think he could do Final Fantasy. I think he would keel over and just stop after the first game.
Well,
His
yeah,
heart would
especially-
just cease.
Especially starting at the first one. Like the first one is like that is an old game. There is some archaic.
No, was that the first Final Fantasy game was in color, right?
Barely.
Yeah,
That's an NES
barely.
game, right?
I believe so.
Oh.
It's also the one that came to the US, or didn't come to the US for a while, because the US got Final Fantasy III as Final Fantasy
Mm-hmm.
first, which then confused the naming scheme for a while. So it's been
Would
an
he be
interesting history.
Would he be okay with Chrono Trigger? I feel like we've recommended that before.
I've
I think he
recommended
could
it
do
to
it.
him so many times, but he's just said no every time.
It's he doesn't like pixel art, for one thing, so that's
Oh
probably
my
why.
god.
But
Oh my god.
look, we love Wyatt, but he is very peculiar, very specific in his tastes, and does not like many other types of styles, including primarily anything Japanese at all. This includes games, media, all of it. All right. So what I would like to do this episode is take a deep dive into some of our favorite games that Wyatt would most likely, maybe not hate, but comment sarcastically about, and then not say anything else because he had never played them. So
and he'd never want to play.
and never
either,
want to play.
because
Yeah.
Just by looking at them, he would go, eh.
All right.
Eh.
Uh,
But before that, we do have some news from this week. Some interesting things have happened the past few weeks involving a studio called Frogwares and Nacon. So I don't know if you two have heard at all about this, but
Are they a
Sound
subsidiary of Goo exclamation point?
close. Pretty close. So The Sinking City is a Lovecraftian style game that came out a little while ago
Yes.
and succinctly vanished from Steam at a certain point, just kind of gone. It has now reappeared under Nacon as a publisher, including a bunch of DLC and things, and like very obviously not the main release, because it doesn't have Steam achievements, it doesn't have trading cards. Like all the stuff that was Steam enabled in the old game is just now suddenly disabled. So it's very
Weird.
cally not the
Oh.
main thing. It apparently what's going on is some kind of publishing disagreement between Frogwares and Nacon themselves. And what happened is that Nacon argued to the court that until the trial finishes, they still have the rights to sell the game. So it was put back up on Steam without consulting the developers, because they're supposedly using a ripped DRM-free copy that has been re-uploaded to Steam that they could make no changes to. So essentially, they pirated a game that a studio they have a publishing deal with is happening. Now, of course, whether or not it was legal for the studio to take the game off of Steam in the first place is still also under discussion. It hasn't really been determined yet. But by this point, The Sinking City has been re-removed from Steam after, according to the IGN title, the developer has the publisher has pirated the game and re-released it.
That's like, oh my god.
And the big argument here for why they can't do this, because they do have a bit of truth to the idea that they still have the rights to sell it, but they don't have the rights to sell the DLC. And the rip they had included the DLC. So they were essentially selling the complete edition of the game at a massive sale. It like went on 60% sale immediately. So very cheap, with all the DLC and all the extra content, which is stuff that is not meant to be, or not in their publishing agreement, essentially. So that has led to the delisting again, and now that situation has not yet been resolved. So I'm curious to see what this turns out to, probably in a month or so, knowing
If
how
even
long
that.
these publishing trials take.
Jeez. That's wonky.
It is a very weird scenario that I don't think I've ever seen a game like have its developer and its publisher at odds this much over it even being up for sale.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And a lot of the reason it was removed is suspected that Nacon is not following the agreement of the publishing contract. They're not giving the right amounts to Frogwares. Which we have no proof of yet on either side, because like obviously those numbers can't be shared with anyone but the legal teams right now, so we don't know either way if that's true. But Nacon has specifically worded things to not to say that they've upheld their side of the contract, but to say like they have given Frogwares over $1 million in profit. That sounds like a lot, but like split that between a bunch of different developers and studio costs, and then realize that maybe that isn't nearly as much as they think it is, and it may not be the full amount that they were owed. And we also don't know if even that is true. So there's a lot of disagreements going on here, and we'll see how that turns out. So I don't know if any of you guys are following Hogwarts Legacy.
Oh no.
So we got some interesting news, which is actually pretty cool. So Hogwarts Legacy is going to have trans-inclusive character creation. Like specifically
That's cool.
aimed to include trans characters. Now,
Oh.
the bad side of this is that the reason this is happening is likely because J.K. Rowling made a bunch of transphobic comments.
I was gonna say, yeah,
And
that makes sense.
One of the producers of the game supported Gamergate. So there's a bunch of there's a big can of worms underneath this.
So many words.
But at the surface level, what this means is that in character creation, body type, voice, and witch or wizard terminology to refer to the character is all separated.
Good.
Yeah, I am all for that.
At least all that bad stuff ended up accumulating into something that is good. Because, man.
Wow.
And so
unfortunately, it's not 2021.
It's 2020-2. So
woe is my fantasy football game score.
Look, let's just hope that we don't run into 2021, 2020 returns. So hopefully this isn't the Final Fantasy 13 of years. All right.
Oh no.
So there was one other
A Final
very
Fantasy.
interesting piece of rumor mill stuff coming out. Both of you guys are familiar with a little-known Japanese company called Nintendo, I presume.
I've never heard of them.
Oh wow!
Maybe like in passing. I'm
yeah,
not
they
too
make
sure.
they make Hanafuda cards, to play.
Yeah.
Koi. So they've also suspiciously put in orders to buy rigid OLED displays from Samsung that are supposedly for a new Switch model planned this year.
Why
This
would you
model
need
is
this?
supposedly capable of 4K output when docked. Probably not 4K native resolution, but 4K output.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
When it's docked, can't you not see the screen?
Well, 4K output
No, like
to a screen.
outputting to
The
yeah,
OLED
to a
panels
monitor
are still
screen.
720p. They're still 720p, but this is supposedly very big support of a Switch Pro coming out, and it's suspected to begin mass production in June. So that likely means we won't be seeing them until probably holiday, if not later, at the earliest. But we are getting more and more rumors of a Switch Pro, and seeing like the state of some games coming out, I'm not surprised. Like Monster Hunter Rise, especially being like a big title that's coming out soon, which runs pretty well, but it's also coming out on PC next year. So I would guess that maybe that'll coincide with the Switch Pro appearance and like a up-resed version of the game coming out. But yeah, it's a lot more evidence that we're going to be getting a Switch Pro, if not this year, then early next year. And that makes sense with timelines too, because the Switch has been out for a little over 4 years at this point. So
Yeah, it's getting old.
it's hitting around the point when like the 2DS or the DS got the or the 3DS got the 3DS the new 3DS.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, so we're hitting close to that point. So it's not surprising that they're working on this, but I hope they actually are, considering how many times the Switch Pro has been rumored and not released. So we'll see if this actually happens. All right. That is our weekly news. Aside from a bunch of Monster Hunter stuff that came out this morning, which I don't want to bore everyone with. It's very cool, but it's all Monster Hunter stuff. Although I will say, Monster Hunter Stories 2 looking real good, and it puts Pokemon to shame for how good it looks on a Switch. So I am hoping, for the sake of my Fantasy Critic League, that it reviews well. All right. With that, let's jump into the conversation of all things that Wyatt dislikes. Who wants to start us off? Who's got something that they think Wyatt would personally just feel offended looking at?
Just looking at.
Oh.
And funnily enough, Wyatt did actually start playing Final Fantasy VII remake.
The remake.
The remake.
Yeah, the remake before this episode, but still not enough.
I wish he would try Chrono Trigger, but you do make a very good point with his. Did you use the word hatred of pixel art?
No, I don't think it's a hatred. I think it's more just like if he has a game with pixel art and a game without pixel art, he's gonna go with the game without the pixel art if it's in front of him, right?
Yeah, I'm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean the most JRPG games that I have playable experience with are Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger. I've only watched 7 and 7 Remake, and I've watched a little of some of the Persona games.
Oh, those are wonderful. Yeah, I think Wyatt would be averse to the turn-based bit in Persona.
Yeah, it was hard for me to get past too at first, but I think it's mainly the just huge. I mean, like humongolo gungus. I mean, big hongolo bongas story that just all the Final Fantasy games have. No matter how just crazy it is, it always seems captivating to me, though it takes a while to get into. But
I think that's
Chrono
like
Trigger,
the case with most
wow
RPGs. Is they often just take a while to get into. Yeah, I would love to see some Chrono Trigger Wyatt reactions.
I was gonna say I guess triple down now on Chrono Trigger and not only is it like literally the checklist is there for him to just look at it and not like it, because not only is it pixel art, not only is it like an older JRPG, but it literally has Dragon Ball Man behind the art, which is like a big anime name, and that's enough for
and like even within anime, why am I forgetting his name? Toriyama.
Toriyama,
yeah. Toriyama's style is still divisive. Like,
really?
Yeah,
he's gotten away with same face syndrome for the last 40 years.
I think he's got some great like creature designs, but his human designs tend to kind of I don't know. I played Dragon Quest XI pretty recently, and fantastic game, wonderful, generally very good. But the character designs, while many of them are amazing, a lot of them are just like elongated man with very large rectangle eyes.
That's right. I played Dragon Quest IX.
Oh, that's a good one.
Was it 7?
Same difference.
There's a cluster of from. I feel like 7 to 10 is it's same face syndrome, but for a game.
Yep, I get that.
And I think the most frustrating part is that like not only is there on the surface many things for him to dislike, it is literally the game that he has asked for. Chrono Trigger is, at least, of like a story being told like over like huge swaths of time with I'm thinking of the word. I can't think of the single word where it's like you can affect things like by doing something in the past and then you see
butterfly
it
effect.
Causality.
Yeah.
It like it's literally like him describing what he wanted from Chris Tales, a game that he also won't play when it comes out. Is literally just there in Chrono Trigger, and probably legitimately one of the greatest games ever made.
I have something to tell you, Brett. I've never finished Chrono Trigger.
Oh, well, okay. I've finished it, but I've played it through once, right? And
it takes a really long time.
I played like
12 endings,
6 hours of it on the mobile port, and I just couldn't keep doing it. Not because of the game, but because mobile is a platform I really just don't enjoy playing games on. At least like long form games like that, and I just want
It's
to
not
get a good
best.
copy, but it's not on Switch yet.
Yeah,
I got-
and
I got-
don't bother with the Steam copy because
I know.
it'll, at least for me, it'll keep like crashing over and over again and
Crap.
not saving.
If it's not
Very
there,
annoying.
if there's not an updated copy somewhere within the year, I'm probably gonna revert to emulation. But
Just you might as well, yeah. If you do the DS version, it should be the same as the mobile and Steam versions
Huh.
because there is extra stuff that they add.
There are animated cutscenes in the mobile version,
Oh
right?
yeah. Those are really nice looking because those are all done by Toei, so they look
Oh,
just as nice as Dragon Ball Z does.
I'm
that's
salivating.
fun. Yeah, that is the one big JRPG with the original Final Fantasy VII that I've yet to finish, that are just sitting there staring at me in my backlog. Although now I have 7 sitting on my Switch waiting, so that's exciting. But yeah, so I also want to talk in general about like some differences between the style of game that we tend to talk about on the podcast versus the style of game that Wyatt doesn't tend to talk about on
And
the
therefore
podcast.
we don't talk about.
And therefore we don't talk about, because we like to have things that we can all kind of contribute to.
Yeah,
But that means we've been let off our chains, and so
of course.
we've all
Here we
played
go.
some Japanese games. I know, Alex, you're partial to the Professor Layton franchise.
Oh,
I am in love with it. Actually, speaking of the mobile porting of games, I was really happy that that a little bit more life was brought back into them. And I believe when they re-released Curious Village, the first game on iOS and Android, it also came with some extra animated scenes that weren't in the
nice.
original.
That's
Those are
But
always nice.
impressive.
but unfortunately, touchscreen not too good for a lot of the puzzles. It was very stylus based. So
Eh.
Yeah,
a
I
bit of a-
definitely want to pick up a copy of the DS games at some point to play through. 'Cause-
I
Got my
can
DS.
lend you mine since you're back.
Oh, that would be. I would love to yoink those from you at some point.
I think I have most of them with me.
But yeah, that's another franchise I would love to see come to Switch, because I don't think we have. I think we might have one on Switch, but I don't.
Yeah,
think
yeah.
we
You have the
majority.
most recent one, which is Latent Detective Agency.
Yeah.
And then there's one that was iOS exclusive, which wasn't really a Professor Layton game, more like more like what was it? Was kind of Ace Attorney meets Phantom Detective, Ghost Detective, something like that.
Oh,
I
Ghost
think-
Trick.
Ghost Trick. It
Ghost
was a
Trick
little
is
bit.
a wonderful game.
It was a little Ghost Trick meets Ace Attorney, and it was completely. I don't think it was canon at all. It was still fun.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's another interesting topic to talk about when you mention canonness. Because I don't know if you two know this. I assume, Brett, you've probably run into this idea before with having played a lot of JRPGs, but canon generally means like a different thing
Yeah.
in Asian
Oh?
countries. Like canonness doesn't really matter. It's the reason that like Dojin games are such a big thing. Because the idea that like characters have a set story is just not really a thing.
Oh.
Which is also why, like, minor spoiler for Age of Calamity, for anyone about to play that wants to play Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. I'm not spoiling the ending or anything, but that game was often marketed as if it was a prequel to Breath of the Wild. It is not in any way a prequel to Breath of the Wild. It is an alternate timeline, which is still
No.
fun, and you still get to see a lot of fun character interactions and stuff, but it becomes very clear pretty early on that it is not a direct prequel. Which bothered Wyatt a lot, and I do admit,
As
for
it
me,
would.
it's
We
not
are.
it's not the best thing, because it is like.
We are.
Go ahead, Alex.
We are on his anti episode. So.
The Wyatt anti episode. But yeah, Age of Calamity, because there is still a lot of potential for like a Warriors game being an actual prequel to Breath of the Wild. So it was a little disappointing to see that like it didn't fill in the gaps of what happened leading up to Link being asleep at the start of Breath of the Wild. So It's a little disappointing, but not in the way of like the game is bad, but in the way of I would still like to see that version of events. But Age of Calamity's version of events is still really fun and enjoyable. I think for Wyatt, not having it be canon has kind of killed it. I kind of doubt he's going to finish that game.
Oh well.
It is very long, though. That's also part of it. So, Brett.
Yeah.
You've been playing some games recently.
I have been playing some games.
That a certain member of our cast typically would not enjoy.
Yeah. What specifically? Because there's I'm thinking of like three things.
I was thinking of Ace Combat.
There's a bit of a cross section here.
Because I'm in the middle. I'm in the middle of Wild Arms 5, Metal Gear Solid 2, and yeah, going through Ace Combat because I always play those. But yeah, I have kissed the afterburner of this game series many a time on this podcast. And in doing so, I've probably like wrung out almost all the interesting things left for me to say about it until we do the special episode,
which is coming very soon.
But yeah, he that is not a Wyatt franchise, and it's a like because every time like. Because I like thinking of things to recommend to my boys. Because I like seeing my boys be happy playing things that they might not have seen before and be like, oh wow, this is a good recommendation.
And then we are bettered as people.
Exactly. And Wyatt
Wonderful.
is of course a huge narrative stan, as we'll say. And
I
I
like
like
that.
one of the coolest things that Ace Combat does through its game is like managing to tell a super interesting, super political and emotional story through what is basically just like an arcade flight sim that, you know, if the story wasn't there, it'd still be fun. But the fact
story
that
just elevates it.
It elevates it by at least 7 nukes.
Oh.
So
7
you know.
Sahelanthropuses. The weapon to surpass Metal Gear.
Of course.
Oh boy.
And actually, you mentioned Metal Gear, but Wyatt has played some Metal Gear.
Has he?
Yeah, he's played Metal Gear 5.
Okay.
Which makes sense of the Metal Gears that he would play. But
what did he think of 5?
if I remember correctly, and Wyatt can yell at me later if I'm wrong, I believe he liked a lot of the gameplay. But part of it is that like stealth games generally aren't his thing.
That's
and I think he also was in general just kind of confused because like the narrative is very hard to follow if you're not familiar with Metal Gear lore. It still has like a through narrative, but it is certainly
there's so much deeper.
Yeah, you lose a lot of the connections to other things and like the character arc of the boss and the Kaz and everyone if you don't have that connection to the older games. And especially, I think, I don't remember if he finished the game. I don't believe he did, but he got pretty far. And if he had finished it, he'd also probably not like the fact that the game kind of ends just randomly.
Yeah.
It just kind of stops.
Oh, yeah. In terms of its narrative.
Yeah, so it's missing the third arc that was going to kind of round out all the loose ends. The like big bad arc and whatnot was completed, but the finale of what would have been like managing all the elements that had been set up to be somewhere just kind of vanishes. Which, you know, is evidenced by all the issues going on with Kojima and Konami at the time, but it would have been nice to see the rest of it. Yeah, Metal Gear's an interesting thing too. But I specifically wanted to bring up Project Wingman too, because having played both Ace Combat 7 and Project Wingman back to back, Wingman does some really, really fun things with narrative.
Yeah.
Especially because it's literally just like Wingman doesn't have cutscenes.
It doesn't.
Oh, it doesn't?
Yeah.
No, it has no cutscenes. It's all the pre-mission briefing and radio chatter.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know about you, Brett, but personally I found it much more compelling than Ace Combat 7.
Definitely, yeah. The story in Wingman is way better than 7's.
Yeah, and that's interesting because 7, you know more about the characters at the start of 7. They do a bit of a wind-up of like what the world is like and everything. Wingman just kind of tosses you into it.
Yeah.
And I think that worked in its favor.
Well, is everything? Are all of the Project Wingman games taking place in the same
There's only
universe?
one. There's only one Project Wingman game, and there are 7 Ace Combat games.
There
Oh,
are
series.
more than 7 Ace Combat games.
Well, yeah, and in the more than 7 total, and I think there's also like 9 or something that take place on Strange Reel in the Strange Reel canon,
Yeah,
and there's like 3 that take place in real life, and we don't talk about those.
we don't mention
Um,
those ones.
and we'll get more deeply into the comparison, but I still want to bring it up here so that people don't have to wait like 2 weeks or whatever. But like I Ace Combat 7 had a really like troubled development cycle, and I think that on top of the point of the game, I think kind of being like, oh, one of these hasn't come out in like for a mainline story in 10-ish years.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's been a
So we
while.
should probably bring new people into this genre that we used to be pumping out games for left and right. So I think they had like a lot more like setting up to do on top of all the fan service that they wanted to give.
True.
And Project Wingman was just like, we know who this game is for, and they're gonna love everything we
Yeah,
put in it.
that's
And they
true.
were like super confident about that.
But there's something about Project Wingman and Ace Combat 7's relationship that I do think is very interesting and something that we don't often see. And that is the idea that a Western developer is taking a lot of ideas from a Asian game, which often
Yeah.
does not happen.
Yeah.
We're starting to see it more, and it's starting to be very exciting. And I would also love to see the reverse. Like, I want to see more Asian games taking influence from Western media. Like right now, with like the big example is always Dark Souls. Of it takes a lot of tropes from like medieval fantasy.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But man, I would love to see some more things in modern AAA productions that match up with a lot of the like Japanese aesthetic and in general like non-American aesthetic. It's also why I was super happy to see and a game Wyatt actually does like is Raji. That like little indie action
I still need to play
Prince
that.
of Persia style game that was teased or not teased but launched during a Nintendo Direct. That is like from a Indian studio doing Indian mythology and
Ooh.
is very, very interesting and unique to look at, and just like doesn't look like anything you've seen before because it's actually a unique setting. Like it's based off of stuff that we just don't tend to see in games. And I really want to see more of that just in general.
Yeah.
But primarily the stuff I want to talk about is like Wingman has some environments that are far cooler than I think anything in 7, and I think that goes for a lot of games in general, especially that take influence from like the over-the-topness of a lot of Japanese media. Like I don't know if you guys have ever played a Xenoblade or some of the Final Fantasy games do the same thing where the environments just look insane.
Yeah.
Like nothing you would ever see anywhere remote to real. I want to see more of that. And like give me
Yeah.
a Mass Effect where the planet is just like
Living.
collapsing in on itself or something.
Oh yes.
Play Outer Wilds.
I have played Outer Wilds. It was wonderful.
Alex Labella, play Outer Wilds.
Is it on Steam?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh yes.
But yeah, the indie scene has been doing a lot of that lately, and I really want to see, like, I would love Dragon Age 4 to just show up with something insane.
That would be so
Oh.
sick.
I'd love for that to happen.
And I know BioWare is capable of it because for everything people say about Anthem, Anthem had some small elements of like map design and overall environmental aesthetic that were pretty unique. And I hope that that is not what they take away as the thing that should be cut from their portfolio going forward. Because Anthem had a lot of problems, but I actually think the environments were not the level design, but the environments themselves could be pretty cool.
Yeah, the actual visuals themselves for Anthem were pretty sick looking, which is why like that's the thing that brings
That
people
sold
in
people on
first.
it.
That's why you got such a huge crowd of people to disappoint.
Oh,
I mean, yeah, I point to Anthem and No Man's Sky both as examples of that. Like, people get sold when you show them weird things that they haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can turn that around and make something really cool, like No Man's Sky has done. Or you can abandon it forever, like Anthem.
Yeah.
Which I don't
And
remember if we
then-
mentioned that, but Anthem has been abandoned.
If
Officially.
we actually did forget, that would be really
Yeah,
funny.
it's
if,
not-
if this is its mention.
No one really cares anymore,
No.
so it's not that important. But
Officially
Anthem was
dead.
officially ended. Anthem Next
No.
is canned.
Not that anyone showed up to the funeral.
No.
Yeah.
Everyone already left.
So
Um.
that's an interesting situation, but go on, Brett.
I was just gonna say I'm definitely of the same mind when we talk about like the kind of interweaving of I don't even know like what to like call it, because it's almost like, especially with things like Raji, or like doing things in a very like feudal Japan setting or something like that. Like there's a very like ethnic quality to it, but it sounds weird when I say it like that, because it sounds like I'm going to say something like insulting, or like some weird like core class phrase or something. But that is what it is, because it involves like a culture's personal history and stuff. Um and I love seeing more of that, and I love seeing modern interpretations of that to like bring people into like, oh, like what is this thing symbolize? Oh, is that like an actual like deity that people like believe in or something? Now we'll go into a Wikipedia rabbit hole for the next 16 hours learning about this whole thing that just looked really cool on like a wall panel in a game or something like that.
Absolutely.
There's some. God, I remember doing this for a project a while ago. There's there were a couple pretty notable like South African game dev studios,
Yeah, there are.
and their takes on I think what I saw mainly were side scrollers, but it was really interesting that the types of mechanics that they came up with that I just never would have thought of.
Yeah, it's also I think just a huge thing with game development in general is that a lot of game developers push for diversity, and some people will see that as just like pushing for diversity's sake. But a lot of the real reason is that like you need those perspectives to come up
Ideas
with
get
fresh
stale.
ideas. Like you gotta have someone on your team who can go like, this is dumb.
Yeah.
Try this instead. This is really cool.
Or
And yeah, a lot of Western studios, or at least AAA studios, tend to kind of smother that environment. I'm happy to see we're moving away from that in general. Like a lot more
Because
unique ideas have been shown recently.
is that because of the fear that it's not guaranteed to be successful?
Probably. Yeah.
So I think
It's-
part of that is America's like constant push for like the stock market and
Yeah.
Yeah.
public companies trading, making sure that you're always showing not steady profits but steady growth. Like it doesn't matter if your studio can sustain itself forever if it's not going to be able to grow. When in reality, like I think a lot of game developers don't necessarily care about making their studio bigger or more fancy, but would rather just be able to sustain themselves making things that they like.
Mm.
Um,
Reddit has showed what they're capable of.
and like I think you can see when like some indie devs, especially, manage to do that successfully. Like Stardew Valley is always a good example. Minecraft when it first came out, like it really shows how far a person or group of people can take a game that they really care about. And that leads me into flawless segue, Final Fantasy XIV. So
There we go. We've made it.
I know you
the most
two,
unwhytable game of all time.
you two have not played Final Fantasy XIV.
No,
I
but
have
I
not.
have heard Final Fantasy.
And I am now
14.
going to tell you, you should both, once you have a chance to just sit down and vibe with it, try the free trial, because it includes all the wild story stuff. All of it. You can go all the way up to like the last couple of expansions, I think. So
Cool.
I wouldn't be running into my character if I played that part. Would I?
what do you mean your character?
The story?
Oh no, yeah, absolutely
Okay.
not. You'd be fine. That is a much further in the game instance,
Okay,
and
okay.
also it's an MMO with a lot of side quests. So the odds of you even managing to find your character
Duh.
would be insane.
Don't test me, Wyatt. No, not Wyatt. Oh God, I'm sorry.
Oh
Don't test me, Ryan.
no! Yeah, because I want to just like commend the game for doing that. So, a lot of Final Fantasy and a lot of JRPGs in general have a distinct moment where you're playing the game, everything's going as expected. You've got your airship, you got your crystals, and then something happens. Something happens that makes you go, "Huh? Wait, no, excuse me, you can do that?" And then you're just wondering, like, what can they possibly do from here to make that, to explain that situation, or like, where is the party gonna go after this? I hit that point in Final Fantasy XIV. I finally finished the baseline story of the original release, and it had a moment that went, because it's a game that, like, you could consider these minor spoilers. I don't think it's going to affect anyone's enjoyment, and I'm not mentioning any characters or whatnot. But for most of the time, it's an MMO. It tends to pull its punches with like things like character death and whatnot. Like, you're generally not going to see a main like voice acted quest giver die because they probably have more to do. You're generally not going to see like characters change a lot because the environment needs to be static for a lot of players, so that way you're not getting like environments that are drastically changed. So I went into the end of Realm Reborn thinking that would be the case, right? They're not going to do something so crazy that like everything is turned on its head, right? Because it's an MMO. You need to have these things be accessible. I was completely wrong. They went crazy. I don't know what's going to happen anymore. I've lost everything. I have no clue what's going to happen, and I'm so excited.
Awesome.
It is a feeling that I think the last game to do this to me was Persona 5, and like Yakuza 0. It's so rare that I always have to like shout out any game that manages to do it, and especially because like, man, it is just such a good feeling when you hit that kind of point.
I think I've only ever actually gotten that feeling. It's more of like beyond what a typical twist can do.
Exactly.
Where a game just completely pulls a sneaky on you.
I mean, in design terms, we're actually the term that we tend to refer to that kind of stuff as is a game changer instead of a twist.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But I've only really experienced that in JRPGs and other games similar to it.
I think the only like Western franchise that has managed to consistently do it is Mass Effect. Mass Effect has got a few moments that I would probably stack up with that, especially if you get bad endings in Mass Effect. You hit some of those points. But yeah, 14 hits a point where I think they realized that the story was starting to kind of stagnate, and they were like, what can we do to introduce new characters to this world, make it a lot more interesting, kickstart this whole deal? Because like by the end of Realm Reborn, you've kind of dealt with the main threat, and so at that point you're left kind of wondering, well, what's next? Like we killed the god threat, so what is the next thing? Not like the actual god. It's not a normal JRPG where you do fight the literal god at the end.
It wouldn't be the first time.
But you fight like a huge threat that after the point you're just left being like, huh, like what is next? And then the game like slows down and you're like, huh, we're left with the fallout of now basically collapsing a nation, which means there's refugees. There's a bunch of like random magical catastrophes happening. And it just makes you like deal with the fact that turns out there were consequences for doing the JRPG thing.
And it's all your fault.
It's not even that it's your fault, it's that there's very little that you can do about it, because you realize like 14 does a very good thing with managing how many enemies you're fighting. So a lot of normal Final Fantasy games, you're constantly fighting like hordes of creatures and whatnot. 14 does a good job of limiting that.
I've only seen the boss battles that you showed me. Is regular combat in the same almost top-down-ish format as that, or is it?
Yeah. It's MMO combat. You can change the camera angle as much as you want.
Oh, okay.
It actually does have a first-person camera.
Oh,
bizarrely enough.
If you're insane.
Yeah, if you really want to do that to yourself, you can do that.
I think I am insane.
The option is there.
The wild thing is that like 14 has these things called trials, and what a trial is one boss fight. The entire instance is a single boss fight that you have to queue up and find a party for. Sometimes you'll get in an 8-person party to do it. Sometimes a 24-person
Oh.
to fight one boss.
Oh.
Why
Which
do I
is
feel
so
you're
much
gonna need all
fun.
24 people and then some?
Because it really sells the idea that like your character is powerful, but they are not like God. They can't overcome most scenarios in the game without allies or help, and that means when you are brought low by certain story events, like you actually have concern of like, I legitimately can't do anything here. Like there's nothing that the game has set me to believe that I could do here that would help this situation, which is rare for a Final Fantasy game.
Yeah, usually they don't do anything like that. They certainly emphasize, the power of friendship, but that's not to that extent.
Yeah, it's great. Very much worth trying that free trial. That like I've been playing the game for years at this point, on and off, and have not hit the end of what the free trial offers. So it is very generous.
Since this is
Good.
the anti-Wyatt episode, how often in 14 would you say there's the hua?
So that 14 is, I think, a little better at it than like 7 Remake is, and that characters aren't often just grunting randomly. But at the same time, it's an MMO. A lot of the dialogue is done through text boxes because you can't voice act an MMO with that much narrative in it.
Can you imagine
Yeah,
the undertaking it would be?
A lot of it would probably be pretty
they
bad.
make good decisions of when to voice act. Like all the major scenes are voice acted. And as the expansions go on, you get to the point of like 90% of what you're doing is voice acted.
Oh,
It's just like the side quests and stuff that involve characters that are like one-offs or less intensive, more like goof-off type stuff generally won't have voice acting. But all those main scenario scenes do. And something to mention with that is that they do an interesting thing in that they completely change voice actors for everyone at the end of that major sequence that I was describing.
Oh.
Because that's when the first expansion came out. Because the original voice actors, there's a lot of names that people know, a lot of people that do a lot of anime, and they
dare
have
I
that
ask,
sound.
Dare I ask, is there a canon reason for the voice actor switch?
No, that's
Okay.
not. It is not that kind of scenario. It's a scenario of they were using an American dubbing studio that had a lot of people that you would see in your common Funimation dub or something. They swapped to a British studio at the start of Heaven's Ward, which was the first expansion, and everyone immediately got a lot better.
Really?
Yeah, because I think a lot of what happened is when 14 came out originally, it was a dumpster fire and got completely canceled. The director left the project. They added Yoshi P, who is like Naoki Yoshida, who is the like director and producer for 14, and now the producer on 16. So that man basically like single-handedly restructured the project to fit his vision, and they were also giving it to him as like a test of if this fails, we're just going to cancel it. So it's impressive that they brought it back to this point. So FF14 is the reason that Square Enix is not hurting from Avengers failing. Because of that, those sub costs are covering the losses of Avengers, which is interesting to hear about. But yeah, so that team had a little under 2 years to fully remake the game, like all of it, and that's why a lot of the main story in the base game is not voice acted, is because like you have to make some decisions in that time period about what is important enough to voice act. But as soon as the patches and whatnot started, they like 50+% has been voice acted, and it's getting higher the further you get into it.
That's pretty cool.
But yeah, it's just the way they handle their narrative is very impressive. But it also is still very hard to recommend because it's an MMO, and if you don't have a tolerance for MMO things, you're still probably not going to enjoy a lot of what the game has, and you have to do stuff like dungeons to progress the story. So does have that downside, at least until the expansion, where they let you do all the dungeons on your own with the AI party members of all the characters from the story. So
That's convenient.
it's fun. But yeah, I've talked a lot now. So who else has a game they want to talk about that Wyatt would traditionally shake his head at? I know you have both played many a game that Wyatt would dislike.
How? Because I actually don't know this. How is Wyatt? How is our man with jank?
He hates jank.
Because I'm still like, I'm thinking
Like
of the
remember,
first-
think back to Tsushima, the camera, how much of a
Yes.
sticking point that was for Wyatt.
I
But
I
does
am
he hate
thinking
Tsushima?
He
he
doesn't
does
hate
like
it,
Tsushima, but not as much as us.
but like
'Cause
his
he
Tsushima
got-
is like a 7 or 8.
Well,
Yeah.
he has the Wyatt curse where that happens to him.
He has
so
the Wyatt
often.
syndrome. Yes.
What does he have a
My-
magnetic field that disorients
He does.
Corrupts the
He
hard
has-
drive of any
He
console
has
he
an
uses.
it rusts the hard drive around him. But I'm still like, because I was thinking about it after we talked about Metal Gear for a little bit. I feel like if we tried to make him play the original Metal Gear Solid,
Oh,
he
wait,
would
the
not.
pixel version.
No, not Metal Gear one, like Metal Gear Solid on the PS1.
Ah, okay.
Like the first solid one.
Ah.
I don't think he'd make it. I don't think he'd make it through. Because again, the story and the voice acting and everything is great. Like I even though I'm playing 2 right now, I still want to go back and play that one again.
Yeah.
It is just like not jank because bad, but jank because old. And boy howdy,
I
he
mean,
would not have a very fun time.
by that order, I think regardless of once again, regardless of story, he'd probably have he would not have a good time trying to do the first Deus Ex.
Yeah. And it's also a combination of them being stealth games too, which I
Yeah.
think
Oh,
he
yeah, that's
traditionally
right.
doesn't
I forgot
enjoy
that
that
bit.
much. Which I get. Because like stealth games are definitely up certain people's alleys and not others. And that's just like a given with the genre. Because they're slow. The pacing is generally much more methodical than your average action game.
Especially if the stealth is bad too, then you have to
Yeah,
deal with a bunch of stuff
especially
that
if the
doesn't make
stealth
any
is bad.
sense.
But yeah,
The stealth is bad in a stealth game. Huh.
Ugh, you'd be surprised.
yeah. I mean, it's also weird though because Wyatt like admonished the stealth sections in Tsushima
For not being stealth enough.
for not being stealth enough. I'm like, if they were more stealthy, it would be much less fun because they want you to be able to use the combat system.
It's,
stealth if you
it's a
want.
very good. I think it's a pretty decent example of the versatile stealth system in
Yeah.
video
Yeah.
games, where you're able to re-engage in being hidden.
And it's also like people constantly say that AI having those timers to essentially go back to their patrols is dumb, but as soon as you don't do that, the AI becomes a lot less predictable.
Yeah, and not in a good way.
Yeah.
If you can't nail that perfectly, it is often not in a good way.
I think the like still the only games that have managed to do that and retain some semblance of success are the Thief games.
Yeah.
But even like Thief is not a big franchise. Like those games are not system
And
sellers.
even then, it's just maybe the first 2 that are
yeah, the
definitely
first
not playable for Wyatt, but playable. I mean, for me in a story.
I don't know. I actually
overall,
find
think
the first 2 hold up pretty well because the art direction was very good.
that- even for
graphically, they're
brown
pretty,
and black.
they're pretty rough graphically, but they make very
Yeah.
good use of lighting and push hardware as much as they could at the time. But yeah, it's a. I think stealth in general is just a divisive genre.
Especially for our man.
Though I
Our
will
man
say,
of the hour.
I
man
did
of 2
watch.
hours.
I went back and watched like a movie cut of Metal Gear 1 with all the pixels and everything, and it was glorious. It's so much fun.
It's so good. It's such a good dude. I like. I don't. It'll never be in that situation where you could just like where it's like a Star Wars movie where you could talk about Darth Vader being Luke's dad like left and right and no one cares. It'll never be in that situation. But I just want to talk about all the things that happen. I just so bad. Even though like it's in that like weird valley where like everyone that already cares about it has already played it and knows what happens, and then no one else is going to.
Yeah, and
unless
then the
they make a new
franchise is
one.
kind of dead in the water
Yeah.
until some agreement is sorted out between Konami and Kojima, which will likely never happen. So,
Yeah.
but hey, we got Death
Which-
Stranding from that, and Death Stranding is super cool, just for
I-
being unique.
I need to play that game. I just need to have enough time where I can really just sit down and just like be absorbed by the walking sim. Because I love
Absolutely.
walking sims, and I know that
I mean,
that's
that
not
is the
just
most advanced walking sim.
exactly. It is hyper walking sim.
It's a carrying sim.
It is the walking sim, except walking is as difficult as combat in most games.
Of course.
And then there's also combat.
And
There's
yeah,
also combat, but if you kill anything, everything explodes. So
don't worry about it. And also I don't know how it's Kojima's storytelling is a weird thing to like pin down in terms of like thinking of like essay buzzwords to describe it as, because it's not. It is very over the top, but also very like Western in a lot of
yeah,
ways. But
it's
I
because
think
he follows a lot of filmmaking
he does, yeah.
principles.
And that man does his research too. Like even if it's just like slapping you in the face with a million different names of just the guns that the guys in front of you are using, like it just like no other game does that except for like the ones where you have to select them for your loadout or something. And this man is like giving you all the how helicopters work and stuff like that. And I
And
think
will then also raise them into the air with psychic powers.
yeah, of course.
Oh.
Same scene.
I don't think that sort of over the topitude, as we'll call it, is up Wyatt's alley. I feel like that gets into some kind of like it is some fine cheese. Like that is some wonderful corn that comes out in Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2's stories, and I don't think they're up his alley.
Yeah, I guess the way I would explain that to many people listening is that when you're playing a game and it gets super over the top, I think there are a few different reactions people will have. Some people will see that and be hyped as all hell. That's where I fall.
Yeah.
I think that's where probably all three of us fall. With Wyatt, he sees something like that and he'll go, but this doesn't fit in the world. And that's a valid concern. But I think it's just like what kind of like why you play games is where that'll kind of come into
Yeah.
play. Like
With that, I think he's affected by the game designer curse.
yeah, of judging everything you play.
Much like how I'm sometimes, unfortunately, affected by the game artist curse. I'm just like, oh, look at that seam in the texturing.
Tangent.
Yeah.
Yep.
That too.
Yeah. So I think that's
can
what
see
it
the
often comes
polygons.
down to. A good example is we've been watching Wyatt stream FF7 remake, his reactions to finally playing it now that it's on PS Plus, which is a lot of fun. But man, he some of the things that I think Alex and I have very much enjoyed about watching or playing that game, Wyatt will see and go, huh? And just like Cloud's hair really hangs him up. And I get that. But at the same time, it's spiky hair, dude. It's fun to have your spiky hair anime boy fighting with a giant sword.
What's not to like if you're not Wyatt?
What is not to like about fighting a giant house? I mean,
What's not to like about a crazy motorcycle chase?
The motorcycle chase
was
the Pompadour
great.
Man.
Oh, Wyatt's reaction
My
to motorcycle
God.
chase with Pompadour Man was so disappointing.
What a villain.
He was not happy about that segment. It made me so sad.
Because I think I was the only one that hadn't watched or played like that far in. So I was just looking at it, I was like, I don't know if this is I don't know the consensus on this. I don't know if it's actually good or bad. It looks cool, but I can't play it. So I don't know. And then Ryan came back from like making food or something and I was like, uh dude, what's going on right now? And I was like, oh yeah, it's this part. This is awesome. And I was like, eh, it's not very mechanically interesting. It's a motorcycle chase through a tunnel, and you're fighting a guy with a huge pompadour, and his
And it happens
motorcycle
one
looks like a
time.
locomotive.
You do that one, maybe two times over the course of the entire game, and it's maybe 10 minutes long at the most. I would rather have variation than it all be mechanically very good, and I'm a systems designer. So.
That's the thing, right? Because like on the one hand, okay, I guess you're moving around left and right, and like maybe changing speed or something, and then pressing button to swing sword. But at the same time, you are going like 120 miles per hour down a sci-fi tunnel with beautiful
Dude, and if you're
lighting,
paying attention, you can dodge every single attack in that scene.
and you have like a 7 foot long sword on your back, and people are shooting at you, and you're not dying. How awesome is that? I don't care that I only press one button. If it feels cool, that's sick. I'm in. My brain doesn't have to be like occupied with like a billion like parries and button prompts and crazy like stuff going on, like sparks flying everywhere. Like if I just do one thing and the one thing is cool, I'll do it over and over again for the one segment that it's there for.
Yeah.
And I'll be happy.
And man, that is, Brett, you need to play Yakuza 0 if you haven't. The mini games in that game are often the level of depth of a game in their own right.
Is that the one with the Mario Kart?
That's Yakuza 7, which is
Okay.
also great. It is more of a standard JRPG. But yeah, like the thing I always love is I love mini games and like random stuff, and it's interesting seeing Wyatt's reaction to the darts game in FF7.
So much, but he didn't like going the motorcycle. Oh my god, he's got the highest score possible in the darts game, but he didn't like the motorcycle chase.
Oh, he did finally get the high score on the darts game.
He didn't get the highest
did.
score possible, but he tied
Oh.
Wedge for high score, which was good
I
enough.
thought I saw him at the top, but I must have.
He was at the top because he beat Wedge's score he might have beat Wedge by 1 or he tied, but he still did it enough to get good. Which is, yeah, I love when games have those weird side things that you can do, especially like that's generally JRPGs. It's pretty rare to find those in a lot of Western games, and like that's always the disappointment with like your Ubisoft games or your Bethesda doing Skyrim again kind of deal, because like as much as people generally didn't like Oblivion's speech wheel, it was at least an interesting idea. And
But
it
now
was
we
different.
have Skyrim, the board game.
Yeah, but now we have Skyrim, but you click dialogue prompts to do everything in the game. Which can be a lot of fun, but like, man, I wish there was something in there, like the arena fights in Oblivion, where you could just go to an arena and bet on fights. It's just the kind of fun thing that serves no purpose aside from just being fun. That a lot of Western games just tend to not do. And like that's also when people like advocate for removing things from old Mass Effect games, like the Mako stuff. Yeah, the Mako stuff was janky, but it was still fun.
Fix it then. Don't like take it out. Make it better so that it works as it was intended.
And even then,
You know-
like the Mako was horrendous to control, but it was still fun to watch it go flying off a cliff and like bounce around like a rubber ball. So I will take my enjoyment from it, despite it being a little janky. Although I do have a higher tolerance for jank than a lot of people. Just being as into like design as I am, sometimes the intent of a system is more effective for me than the system actually working fully. But yeah, it's something I definitely do want to see more in a lot of Western games. And just like, I think this mostly pertains to like RPGs, of having weird extraneous side activities that don't serve a lot of purpose. Yeah,
I think
it'd be
that's
fun.
weirdly enough, I think that's like kind of part of what's like turned me off from like Western RPGs for so long is that there's just like a different the like the scale for the amount of heart that is in like a JRPG and a Western RPG, like they do not match. I just feel like there's so much more like energy and oomph and heart put into like all the different things that happen or that you can see or do in a JRPG, and then I look at all the Western RPGs that are on the docket or whatever possible for me to play, and they all kind of like look the same. And apart from
Yep.
maybe like some people that go like, "Oh, I played this one for like 500 hours. This was my life for like 1 year, and I didn't do anything else but play this." I go, "Good for you, bro. This looks gray."
Yep.
They just kind of all look like gray, sad
Gray
times.
and brown and maybe the occasional green is what you
Like,
get.
just gimme something good to eat, man. Like, give me something that isn't in all the other ones. Give me something, and it's like I, I'm not even tired of just like the Western like medieval sort of thing, because things like Dark Souls do that in ways that Western devs didn't until Dark
And
Souls came
it's
out.
not to say Western devs can't do this, because Infinity Blade exists.
Well, it did
Weirdly
exist.
enough, Infinity Blade, the mobile game, existed and had a wonderful sense of like aesthetic and design. It was gray and brown, but there was
It's the first
light
time
everywhere. There was
it
like
was the first
tech,
time. Yeah, it was the first time that I saw that combat system too, which
which still has not really been successfully emulated in anything that is
yeah.
not like a dumpster fire. The
I
only
miss it
game
so
I've seen
much.
successfully emulated is a VR game called Until You Fall, and that is like the only game that I've seen run with that combat system. And man, I would love to get another mobile game that like does Infinity Blade as well as Infinity Blade did, or just re-release it. Yep, just put the game for sale again. That'd be great.
Please, Epic.
Bring it to Android. But yeah, uh, I wish some more devs would see the like, and like Morrowind exists. Morrowind's another great example of like,
Oh, would Wyatt not like Morrowind?
I think Wyatt does like Morrowind, but
Oh,
I'm just talking about aesthetic
okay.
and like the grayness of RPGs in general, and a lot of Western games. I think where it tends to come down to, and like the reason for that split between Western and Eastern ideas, is a lot of Western studios are constantly pursuing maybe not realism, but pseudo realism, and like really trying to limit the amount of suspension of disbelief you have to use to stop thinking it's a game. When in reality, I don't think games need to convince you that they aren't games to get you attached to characters and invested
Yeah.
in a story.
It's I think yeah, getting into hyperrealism almost. I
Exactly.
think it's getting to the point where how like, we had before photography, before the invention of the camera, there was painting, and with painting before the camera, people tried to get as realistic as possible, and then the camera came into existence, and it wasn't necessary for painting to be photorealistic anymore because photography was there to do that.
And I do actually have to give Ubisoft props for Immortals, because Immortals took that idea and ran with it. Maybe not to 100% success, because I think the character models are still really weirdly proportioned and not quite. They're a little too uncanny valley to, I think, sit well with most people.
Not
But
stylized correctly.
yeah, the environment itself is beautiful. Like, you have these weird like floating structures. You've got the themed areas of the different gods all look very unique, and aren't just like copy pastes of what you would find in like Assassin's Creed. So yeah, I think like we're definitely getting some more of that. But man, I what I really want to see is Bethesda kind of run with that, because I feel like that's been a consistent problem with Oblivion and Skyrim now, and like Fallout 4, is that they're just not
Yeah.
getting weird enough with the environments. Like, we really need to see more stuff that's just take this concept and then run with it, and like what can you think of that makes it very clear that this is a video game? Like you don't need to stick to realism all the time.
They may have had somewhat more colors in their color palette for Fallout 4 compared to Skyrim, but I think it was still very much
Overwhelmingly brown.
stuck in the the overwhelmingly brown 2011 game mindset.
Yeah, and junkyard aesthetic. Lots of junkyard aesthetic recently. And I can knock Final Fantasy VII for that too. Remake has a lot of like gray brown environments.
Clutter is not
weird.
an excuse for character.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely want to see more of that, and we'll probably talk more about that kind of idea next week when we're going to be talking about the ways games differ from other media, and like how they can tell stories. Yeah. But in general, I think what we're saying is just like take advantage of the fact that you're a video game, and a lot of Western developers seem to be afraid to do that, which is a shame.
Because we're still in that weird rut, where like everything's trying to push everything to be more realistic, like you said, and that can't be the point. That is not the point at all, because you know what? I'm gonna be real here. Real life sucks. That's why we play games instead.
Video games are escapism. Don't make it any closer than it needs to be.
Like, sure, there's a total merit to having like have your characters look as close to real as possible or whatever, but like, and maybe you want to do like a realistic drama or something like that, but at some
like a
point,
military shooter, like in
in
that case you do want to be fairly realistic because like you're trying to ground yourself in reality. But
even like at some point, like I'll be playing the whichever Modern Warfare it was, the last one that came out. I don't know what the subtitle date is. I don't care. The one that has Warzone in it. And my girlfriend just like walked in the room and she was like, why is everything so tan and sad? And like I wasn't even in. I was in the city, the cold Russian city. But it can't be Russian, so it's not Russian because the Russians got mad when the game came out and didn't let it get released. But anyway, and I was like, I don't know. That's because that's just what buildings look like, right? And then she looked at me like I was a crazy person and said, "No, you idiot. That's stupid. Real life isn't that sad looking. Real life has color to it, and the game isn't real, so it should have more color than that."
Yeah.
Like I don't know. Even games that are pushing realisms, like give me something to look at. If there's nothing interesting on the screen,
again, I gotta push Yakuza.
Yeah,
Yakuza's got
that is
color.
All the way back to the PS2 games, like those are some like amazing looking city blocks with all the neon and the different signs that are there. Like, whoa, that.
And you might be thinking like, oh, those are very video gamey. And then if you look at the spot that's actually modeled after, it's the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like all the neon, all the crazy colors and whatnot are exactly what the place looks like in real life. And it's like there are places that have color and aren't just drab. Yeah, that's a consistent issue with a lot of games. I love indie games too that go away from it. And there are games that can make use of a subdued color palette. Like recently Loop Hero is a little indie game that came out that has like a very... It's modeled after CRT era low resolution games, and it's got a very limited color palette, very like orange, blue, gray. It still looks wonderful in movement because they stick to a style that is very unique. And like, yes, it's not super colorful, but it doesn't matter because they're selling their aesthetic. And oftentimes the pursuit of realism leads people to think they don't need color when they still really should. And like Horizon Zero Dawn is a great example of like the success of that.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Like they just took everything and injected different colors and whatnot into the world. But yeah, I just want to see an RPG that's got like blue grass, give me something weird. Just have fun with it. I played Monster Hunter and they did that and it was great. So I just want to see more. Like, give me a forest that's not green.
Yeah. Or just like has like now I'm just thinking of like this entire time I've just been thinking of Hyper Light Drifter, which is not a realistic looking
Oh
game at
yeah,
all.
wonderful.
But it has the classic like snow mountain, forest, beach area, desert zone, and like all of them are like non sequiturs to their normal counterparts.
Oh,
And I would love if only there was a 3D exploration game that would have things
If
that looked like that
only there was a 3D game called Solar Ash.
by the same people. The only people who are capable of making a world look like this, apparently, which is not true.
Haven's got
Yeah,
some great direction.
Haven is really pretty. Um, and I like that. This is so wildly off topic by this point.
That
But
doesn't
I
matter.
like that
It's
kind of.
our topic this episode is just Wyatt not here.
Aw.
Yeah, you're right.
We can do whatever we want.
I like the lower poly kind of 3D cartoony style that a lot of games are going for their characters now. Haven is the example at the forefront of my brain, but
Yeah, Haven's a good example. Absolver is a
Absolver,
classic, like weird looking game that just has a lot of interesting character designs. Still a little too gray, but
dude, Ashen.
Ashen.
Ashen's environments are amazing. I remember being breathtaken by that game. Like the
It's-
forests are like blood red. Oh,
and it still has the very nice overall. I guess I describe it as watercolor
yeah.
esque 3D modeling.
Definitely. And again, Project Wingman got a nice consistent
yeah.
aesthetic. People complained about the orange, and the orange is fixed now.
It was actually too colorful, and they had
It
to
was
tone it down.
too
That's a
colorful.
good problem to have.
Always better to be
I-
too colorful than not colorful enough.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be a problem if you're flying around rapidly, switching between. Oh, here's the ground, here's the sky, here's the ground, here's the sky.
Oh, it was, especially when the
Yep.
sky was orange and the ground was orange and the UI was also orange and the railguns are also orange.
Oh.
You know?
Yeah, it was very orange.
So they changed it. But that was only for like one level or something.
Yeah, it was like the final boss fight and then one other level with all the volcanoes. That was
Yeah.
iffy.
With all the volcanoes.
Volcanoes are a very important part of Project Wingman's story.
And actually, I do got to shout out another game I know Wyatt would not like, because it requires far too much patience and time. Total War. So, and weirdly enough, Total War's most fantastical looking games are not the fantasy games.
Really?
Yeah, so Total War does historical and Warhammer games now. The Warhammer games look very interesting. They're very unique, but they still kind of pursue realistic designs and whatnot. But I've been playing Total War 3 Kingdoms, which is a historical Total War game. But they really, really lean into like Chinese parchment, and the map looks like a Chinese painted map as it fades away until you get more detailed, and then it suddenly looks like a 3D model of like the classical mountains that you would see in like an animated movie about that takes place in China.
I'm looking at it right
Even
now.
in
on
like
Steam.
battle, the units don't necessarily look fully realistic. They almost look a little more cartoony. That's not to say they don't look realistic, but they tend to have a little more color. The blood like super strikes out when it's against something. Your hero units always have like these huge like colored scarves and whatnot to denote where they are. And the animations are like super bombastic. Like fire is just very, very bright, and the ground is like not gray most of the time. And the UI is just brush strokes, so it's like you can totally do realism or it's a realistic setting, but inject culture into it and like things that make it look very visually distinct. And like a good example, Total War also did the Troy game, which was free on the Epic Store. And that has the map looks like a classic Greek like scroll on a pottery. So
Ooh, very nice.
some wonderful stuff done in both those games.
Dude, I gotta stick with it. Another great example of that exact thing. Tsushima depicts
Absolutely.
real life in such a way that is like breathtaking.
Yep, convinced
Like,
that
oh
is
my God.
probably my favorite art direction of a game last year.
Same for me, but for like ever.
Although technically we can say
Legitimately, of all time.
Tsushima won our Game of the Year award. Nah, it was Game of the Year last year, so
Oh,
There we go.
Tsushima and 13 Sentinels Aegis Room.
I still can't believe that one fucking snuck through. I broke the rule. I'm
That's
sorry.
okay, it's okay.
But I'm so surprised.
wow.
I still can't believe that it snuck through. Oh my
who
God.
voted for it? It was Ryan.
Well, I
Me.
voted for it by default.
Yeah.
The problem was no one else voted for Hades, so Hades was left on the wayside, which is a shame
I've
because
said it
Hades is
before.
also amazing.
I am
That
a
game is so
sucker
pretty.
for JRPG or visual novel stories. I had to.
And that segues us perfectly into talking about 13 Sentinels Aegis Room.
Yeah.
Here we go, baby.
Which is
Oh
a game
my
I think all of
God.
us have like some form of exposure to. I've played through the entire thing and 100% of that game. It is wonderful. Alex, I believe,
crave
has
more
watched
exposure to it.
a bit. Brett, I also think you've watched a bit, right?
I have watched most of the character stories. The guy, because we did this thing that I said earlier, where one guy was playing it, and the rest of us were all kind of like together trying to piece together like the mystery and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think what happened is that he just got to the point where he had to do a bunch of battles that had all stacked up because he didn't care, because the story is so good that we
Yeah.
just kept going with the characters as far as we could before we had to do a bunch of fights.
So the game does do a pretty good job of forcing you to do the fights at some point before the end.
Yeah. Like I'm sure if we did them when we were quote unquote supposed to, we wouldn't have ended up with a little mountain of them. But there just came a point where we were like, what's gonna happen next? Oh, we have to do like a couple hours of these things first. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the combat also has some great narrative stuff to it, but yeah, that game is a type of game that will likely not happen again for a long time, because even the people that developed it are pretty iffy on doing that again, because it took like 9 years
Yeah.
to make, and it was a small team. I think it was like 9 to 29 people over the course of its development.
Oh my God. Really?
Yeah, so it was a small team working over like 9 years to make this passion project, essentially. That's a completely original game. That's the other thing. We need more original games, but
Mm-hmm.
it was just a passion project from Vanillaware, who had done Dragon's Crown and Odin Sphere, Leaf of Sphere. So wonderful developers that have done some great stuff, but nothing at all like
Yeah.
what 13 Sentinels is, of like a game that primarily consists of just walking around and talking to people and occasionally fighting like a turn-based tower defense style battle, not turn-based, a real-time like tower defense type of battle, but is also like super in-depth with the story. It tells like manages to somehow rope in every single sci-fi trope and somehow make it make sense and be really good.
And every single anime trope too at the same time.
Yep.
Like, it's insane, and all successfully. Like not a single time did any of us go like, oh, that's stupid. That doesn't fit. That's weird. Like all like, oh, that's what's happening now. Okay, cool. I'm in.
Yeah, it's like the worst thing that happened to me is that like one particular character I just really wasn't vibing with their story, because it was just a little boring, and then it got to the end of that character story and everything was turned on their head, and I was like, it was meant to be that way.
Exactly. They roped you in.
They get you to think it's bad, and then
Surprise!
suddenly they're like, we meant to be that way all along, which was a great surprise. And yeah, it does a great job of like, you can kind of guess certain plot elements, but it is near impossible to guess where the
Yeah.
game is going. So even though you'll likely get some stuff right and you'll piece things together, and the great thing is you can piece things together in completely different orders based on how you play the story. So like, I watched someone else play the story and they got a completely different set of information first because they played different characters. That like completely fundamentally changes how you view other characters, and I didn't do that first. So like, for a while I thought it was just a normal game. Like, I was just like, there's a robot running around, but that's like the weirdest thing there. And then I played another character and it was just like suddenly everything else is imploding. So yeah, super interesting storytelling methods. Very, very fun and very uniquely Japanese.
Yeah,
That is not a
that
game we
could
would
not
get
come out
anywhere
of
else.
any other country on this planet.
It could come out, but it would not be nearly as good. Like it would
Well,
be
yeah, that's
essentially fan fiction if it came out anywhere else.
It would be pretty awkward if that was the
Yeah.
case. It would basically end up being one of those like $1.49 visual novels you can get on Steam.
Yep.
It would be the same caliber.
And I do gotta push for more of those very Japanese style puzzle and like detective games, like Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, yeah, Professor Layton, I the Somnium Files, Zero Escape. Those kind of games
Oh,
just
why did I forget about those?
they don't even come out. Nothing like that has ever come out of a Western studio, unless I'm completely missing something. LA Noire maybe gets kind of close, but is like far more realistic and doesn't really go into the like the existentialism aim, the like Evangelion-esque emotions that most of those games like explore. So
I mean, in Professor Layton, I think that was one of the very first and few games that made me cry just from the soundtrack.
Oh man.
yeah, and like I the Somnium Files is another
Full
game
orchestra.
I can absolutely recommend. Would be great to do the Third Sentinels type thing of like watch someone play it and try to figure out what's happening, because it does the same like branching narrative where you have to play through all the routes to kind of understand what's happening. Yeah, super fantastic game. And available on the Switch, which is always a plus in my mind. Love to see
What is it?
unique Switch games.
What is it with? Oh, sorry. Did you?
No, that was it. I was done.
Okay. What is it about? Because this is something that I think is extremely Japanese to have in a piece of media. They are like almost overwhelmingly existential compared to the stuff that we put out in games and movies and stuff over here. I feel like it's like we definitely get Western games that are I would consider deep, but nowhere near as and I guess it comes from the same like over the top thing compared to what we usually see from Western creators, that they just get so much more um like existential and philosophical like from Western philosophy, but in a Japanese game or movie or something. Like, I don't know. It's just weird that
I think
we don't see that from the place that the philosophers came from.
it comes. My guess to that is it just comes easier in their culture. They're more open to
Yeah,
it.
I'll make an
you know,
adjustment to the statement that was made, because we do see that from some Western games, but not from American games. We see a lot in like Polish and
Oh yeah, you're right.
and
you're
like
right, you're
German,
right.
like pathologic. The Witcher goes into a lot of existential stuff, and my like fledgling history fan fiction take on it, as someone who is like pretty into history, is that I think legitimately this is where it comes into play that America is a young quote unquote country
Yeah.
and doesn't have a super lengthy back culture of like religion that isn't Christian, of like Buddhist practices, of the idea of like meditation and whatnot, which comes in the Japanese and Asian side of like many games will explore those thoughts, because those thoughts are like an everyday part of life there.
Yeah.
Like it's the classic like Shintoism, which is like the Japanese quote unquote religion, is less of a religion and more of just like a way of, not a way of life, but like a set of traditions that you do.
School of thought.
Yeah.
mm,
It is same thing with Buddhism. Like Buddhism isn't quite the same as a religion like Christianity or Islam. It's more of a sort of way of viewing life, and I think having those different views really affects that. And of course, in the case of like European countries, Europe has a super long history of philosophical thought and just philosophizing in general. So I'm not surprised that we get a lot of games like Pathologic out of Europe, and like Stalker is another good example. All generally focused around like apocalyptic settings, but yep, I think that's primarily just we don't really tend to get that out of American studios. I'd be curious if that also ties into the whole canon thing with Western groups of like a lot of American players. I think are more interested in like character stories and the overarching quote unquote plot of something and like seeing an interesting story. Whereas I think the perspective in some other areas is more like I want to feel unique things, and less I want to see unique events.
Yeah.
I think it's a good way of putting it. And yeah, like I definitely get both pathways. Like I don't think every game needs to be existential at all.
Oh,
in
totally,
fact, I would totally hate it if they were.
Exactly.
Like sometimes you need a game like Skyrim that isn't gonna bring up these huge world thought processes to like basically make you panic. Like sometimes you just want to chill and explore, or see a story that doesn't have a greater meaning. It's just a story about characters. Yeah.
Would you say that the newest God of War game is a little bit of that in between,
I think we'll see.
or is it? I mean the one that's out right now, 4.
Yeah, I think it's kind of yet to be seen. I still think it's more of a character story.
Yeah.
It is kind of self-aware of narrative because a lot of what they're doing with the narrative, and like Wyatt, of course, this is something Wyatt would have a lot to say on, so I don't want to go too deep into it. But basically, they're taking a lot of preconceptions that were made from the older games and kind of turning them on their head and like doing a lot of meta character stuff.
Yeah, that's still character and story focused, not really.
And I do think they are touching on some existentialism, but I think that's almost more of a side effect of Norse mythology in general. Of like Norse mythology is very focused on the concept of like life and death is like a cycle, that there is always an ending and there's always a beginning, and it doesn't really matter like where in time that is. Whereas like that's a pretty unique aspect of Norse mythology, in that it's very the way Norse culture or Norse mythology handles time is just very different from any other way that time is perceived. And yeah, I think God of War plays with that a bit, which is fun. Like the idea that the mythology isn't chronological, it's more just events that happen at some point. Yeah. All right. Any other things that we want to talk about that Wyatt would specifically not enjoy?
Wyatt would hate playing Xenogears because of all the other reasons that all the other JRPGs were mentioned, but also because the poor one guy who had to do the localization was in fact only one guy, and therefore there's a lot of slip ups in the script. And I feel like he would definitely be one of those guys to just point every single one of them out and be like, "Oh, I'm taken out of it now."
Yeah, I definitely get where Wyatt's coming from with the immersion issues. Although I don't know, I'm always an easy person to get convinced of a setting being the setting of the thing. Like it takes a lot to make me drop a game because of like suspension of disbelief. Like very rarely will I drop something because of
Whereas Wyatt has one wrong camera angle, and he's
no, he won't drop a game with one wrong camera angle, but he'll complain about it for a long time.
And then we'll let go.
And then it's cyclical. We'll complain about him complaining about a camera angle for a long time.
And then and then it'll remind him to complain about it again because now it's in his head again.
And here we are in one of those steps, but he's not here to hear it.
To be honest, I've been playing Breath of the Wild lately, which is a game that Wyatt does like. But man, it has camera problems.
Yeah.
Not like awful problems. It's better than a lot of games, but the fact that you like need to lock onto something to dodge, but you don't lock on if they're not in your field of view, and a lot of enemies will just jump behind you. So you need to somehow like turn around, but you can't do it quickly by locking on because you can't lock on if you don't see them, and then you can't dodge. So you're just kind of wandering around.
Has that been the case for all like 3D Zelda games?
No.
As far as the lock on and dodge goes?
I mean, it has been, but it's been less of an issue in a lot of the others because a lot of the others are a little bit more designed to openly like control where you're fighting things.
Yeah.
Which of course is like a side effect of Breath of the Wild being super open. There are always going to be some problems with any approach to game development, and that's kind of like a side effect of the openness. Is that it's a lot harder to design those combat arenas.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's one thing I've been noticing is that Breath of the Wild's camera is, to me, a lot less tolerable than Tsushima was. It's definitely not affecting my enjoyment of the game, but it's like, it's noticeable that I have to kind of account for the camera not working.
It did actually
much of the time
affect my enjoyment of the game. So
Although I do gotta say,
much of it.
I love me some motion controls. I know that's a controversial opinion, but aiming with the bow with the motion controls is so good in Breath of the Wild because you can quick scope people with just flicking your hand.
I thought this was the anti-Wyatt episode, not the anti-Brett episode. God.
I don't actually. I think Wyatt doesn't tend to use motion controls, but I don't think he actively hates them. No, I played Days Gone with motion controls on the PS4. It's like the only game I've seen make use of the PS4 gyro controls, and it worked really, really well.
Oh, here I am being a big fan of Skyward Sword.
We'll see what Skyward
Lucky
Sword's reception when it comes out is. I'm so excited to see people that have never played that game before react to the control scheme, especially using the right thumbstick if they're not doing motion controls.
Oh, it'll be something.
It's like No More Heroes occasionally does that, and it's very, very weird.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, not for main combat, but for like certain elements, you have to like move the control stick in specific ways, and it's a little bit janky.
Like a QTE?
Yeah,
or
QTE, but in the style of like you need to point your stick in various directions. You know, like a good old fashioned lightsaber clash, except you're circling your circle pad continually to try and match directions.
I had a Star Wars: The Clone Wars lightsaber dueling game for the Wii that was motion controlled, and
you know what?
It.
I've realized what we need to do to make this truly Wyatt's personal hell. The prequels are not bad movies.
You know what? They're a fun watch.
They're pretty fun. You know what? Yeah, I'll rephrase my statement. They're pretty bad movies, but they're fun to watch. And I generally have more fun watching them than the sequels.
I was, you know what? Finally.
Oh yeah.
Finally.
Oh, yeah. Prequels are orders of magnitude better than the sequel.
Because look, the prequels are goofy, but they don't ever openly break the physics of a world.
They don't obliterate everything that was set up over a massive multi-billion-dollar franchise.
Which is funny that bothers me when I also say I'm the person that can like totally get over a JRPG doing similar things. But generally JRPGs don't make a point of pointing out that this is like a thing that you can't do.
I mean, midichlorians, sure. Palpatine? Palpatine!
Because that is the thing, right? Like stuff like midichlorians is like, well, that's frustrating. Now this mystical thing like has a tangible scientific element to it that makes it inherently less magical. But
it's gonna be harder to wave away things by saying like, oh, a wizard did it.
Exactly. But then they literally just did a wizard did it with Palpatine. I don't understand. Oh my god.
And you see, I'd be okay with a wizard did it with other things, but doing it with Palpatine just invalidates a lot of character arcs that happen.
Yeah.
And it's the same problem with what Luke was doing at the start in his the weird revelations and whatnot. No spoilers for the actual movies. If you are somehow have not seen the Star Wars sequels and care.
God.
But man, it really feels like they completely forgot who Luke was at the end of Return of the Jedi and like what his goals were, and just decided, what would be more interesting if we subverted expectations. Subverting expectations is great when it's earned.
Yeah, doing it for plain old shock and awe value that isn't warranted.
Yeah.
Big ol' stinky poo-poo move.
It's almost like they tried to turn Star Wars into a like highfalutin show of equality and distinction, and we're not generic fantasy anymore. People want generic Star Wars fantasy. That's what,
the
it was
universe.
never meant to be something more than just generic space movie. It just did generic space movie the best.
also, hot take: Ahsoka is probably the best character in Star Wars. And
Oh, I don't think that's a hot take. I think that's
it's a hot
very,
take for Wyatt.
very easy. What? That's a
Look,
very easy conclusion to come to.
I think people often will correctly say that Ahsoka's very annoying at the start of the Clone Wars, and guess what? That's the point. She
At the
gets a
start
lot
of the
better.
Clone
She
Wars,
learns. She changes as a character.
There's
It's like
development.
Sokka in Avatar. Sokka's insufferable at the start,
Oh,
Yeah.
but becomes one of the best characters in the show. So I won't defend Jar Jar in the Clone Wars, though. That's too far.
I was recently watching a video where someone breaks down to a scientific filmography level why the last Airbender movie is the worst piece
Oh,
of cinema in the
God.
history of the world.
Even Wyatt would agree. That's
yeah.
insufferable.
Oh, we can't see that would be Wyatt's personal hell is watching that movie on repeat.
My God.
Oh yes!
I think we found the
Wyatt's
new
personal
winner.
hell. Wyatt's personal hell would be a sequel.
I mean, to be fair, that would be my personal hell too. The only way I could get through it was by watching Wyatt watch it.
Dude, no, you know what? The true personal hell. They make a sequel. It's really good. The only issue is that they still mispronounce every single character name.
Ung.
Would you look at that? I'm feeling physical pain from a conversation we're having.
So you're watching a really, really good movie, and then suddenly Katura turns around and says to Sokka, "Hey, look at Ong." And then, of course, Toph walks in.
Not Toph!
Oh,
no, I knew it was gonna be Toph.
And then, of course, there's Zuko.
Zuko. What about Sokka's secondary love interest, Soki?
Soki. I hate this. This is hell. This is no longer a personal hell. This is a public hell.
Oh, Azula's sidekicks.
You mean
me and
Azula's
Tyler.
sidekick?
Azula's sidekicks, me and Tyler.
This sucks. Oh my
This is
God.
horrific. I'm in physical pain from this conversation.
If I may go back to something that was
Yep.
previously
Go
said,
ahead, Brett.
Please.
Because you mentioned a pretty good point, Ryan, that it was weird how like the over the top crazy out of the blue things in something like the Star Wars sequels are like on paper could be considered like the same sort of thing as
Yeah.
like the crazy over the top things that happen in like anime or something like that. And I think the distinction is that like you guys like said it perfectly. Like, they forgot what characters they were dealing with. And usually in an anime or a Japanese game, the crazy stuff that happens is usually in service of the characters. Like there's usually a huge build up to a character finally being able to release all of his power that he's been like saving up, or like his anger that he was trying to hold back or something like that. Just for like the shonen examples, or like a character that has been proven to survive multiple gunshot wounds, slamming a man's head against the wall so hard that it turns into liquid
Oh,
inside of a ski
God.
mask. But like,
Bringing
it's
up Black Lagoon, are we?
seeing someone who should have attained like teacherly, masterly respect and gray Jedi all knowingness, taking his and his father's old weapon and just throwing it away, like that is not in service of a character that is going directly against
Yeah.
what the character would
I
do.
mean,
And
Rey
think
is
that's the
always
difference.
the classic example of like, I think Rey as a character is a great starting point, and then she just stays there. Like
Yeah.
she never changes. She doesn't grow. She learns to use the Force in like an hour. She learns to
Yeah.
use a lightsaber. The same hour she learns to use the Force.
Nothing's
do think-
difficult for her.
I
And
do think
again,
Mark Hamill tried
I want to
warn
make
us.
it very clear this has nothing to do with Rey being a woman. Ahsoka is my favorite character in Star Wars because she earns being powerful and a badass. Like,
There's character development through not just the Clone Wars, through multiple series.
and like Ahsoka even has I read Ahsoka's book, so there's a book about Ahsoka that's very short. But it's narrated from her perspective, and it's her dealing with like situations that they would never be able to do in like the TV show because they are far too difficult. And like that is how you take a Star Wars character and do a piece of like media that is a lot more down to earth and like grounded in like negativity and cynicism than the sequels are. Like, because it is taking things Ahsoka does, and like Ahsoka is still Ahsoka. She's always doing things that Ahsoka would do. She reacts the same way, but you see more of her thought process. Like when she sees someone die, she's like, "That is awful," but because she is like the only less Jedi that's still left, she deals with it, and like has to realize that it's not a problem, and she makes decisions that are interesting. And yeah, it's just the kind of thing that like was not present in the sequels.
But what if she could just like revive them and bring them back to life? Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, but
If
what
she-
if
what if she just do
what if they
that?
took turns reviving each other and then it didn't work anyway?
What if they kissed for no reason?
Look,
For no reason.
I'm not gonna say character
There
names.
was no tension there. That was unwarranted.
I'm not gonna say any character like endings, but Kylo Ren is by far the most interesting character in the sequels, and also the
And they
most
did him
wasted.
dirty.
So wasted.
So much
They
wasted
did him
potential,
dirty.
which is a shame. Yeah, I don't know. Star Wars is disillusioning me, and then of course the Mandalorian comes out and earns it again. So
Mm.
I still need to watch that show. I haven't seen
It's-
past the first 2 episodes.
Oh, it's good. I was watching oh god, over break. I had one of my best friends from high school over for a while, and we binged the entire second season in
yeah,
Well, we split it into 2 days. We were gonna split it into 3, but there's just such a hook towards the towards the end of the second season. It's
yeah. There is a
Oh, it's
Mandalorian
good.
is a good example of how to do things right. For a lot of the parts, I do agree with Wyatt that they rely a little too much on characters that exist and like setting up other shows that really don't
Oh,
need to
yeah.
be set up. Like
Thanks,
Ahsoka,
Disney.
Ahsoka's a famous example of like she's in an episode of The Mandalorian. It's not a spoiler because they've openly talked about that many
Yeah.
times. And I don't know, it's her presence there is of course fun because I love Ahsoka, but it's also at the same time like she shows up and then it's just kind of gone. And there's a bit of there's like a secondary plot segment in there that's really cool as someone who likes the characters it's about of like in Star Wars Rebels, but it doesn't really fit with the Mandalorian. It's like this isn't something that we needed to be introduced to through the Mandalorian. I think Star Wars, Disney in general has that issue now of they're trying to
Yes.
introduce everything.
bringing back things that might not just don't have to be there.
I was gonna say things about WandaVision, but we probably can't talk about that yet for a while.
I mean, yeah, we can say WandaVision. At least it was a lot of fun to watch. Like
It was
thoroughly
very good.
enjoyable.
I don't know. I couldn't get past the second episode.
Well, I think a lot of that depends on your tolerance for like sitcoms. Weirdly enough,
Yeah.
So, Wyatt and I had a lot of fun watching it because like both of us will occasionally enjoy the trashy sitcom kind of deal. Like I will not claim that How I Met Your Mother is good, high tier television, but it is fun to watch occasionally. as just a dumb thing that exists. And watching WandaVision riff on like 60s TV shows is very fun. Yeah. I just think it's an interesting thing. And now that we've covered most of what Wyatt hates,
We've somehow run out of things to say.
now
He has to hate more stuff than just this, right?
That's
What
for
ve-
episode 2 of this
what-
ongoing series.
What vegetables does he have a grudge against?
look, we're gonna sit Wyatt down and force him to eat with chopsticks.
Oh my god! Can he not?
I have no.
Can
I
he
think he
actually
can.
not?
I feel like he can.
If he could,
I
that'd
want
be
to see
really
him
funny.
fumble like a newborn giraffe.
I'm pretty sure he likes sushi.
He just like stabs it into the piece of chicken, like just one at a time, like it's a one pronged fork, like a preschooler would.
All right. Anything else we want to talk about while we are all here and ready and excited? Maybe.
I think that's it. I think we've run.
Yeah, we run the gamut.
Yeah.
So I would love to extendedly talk about JRPGs more, but Wyatt is playing one right now, and I'm going to want to hear his
Yeah.
definitely probably disliking it take.
Definitely positive and unbiased.
Do you think he made it to the point that you were
I
talking about?
cannot wait until anyone that's seen advertising for Final Fantasy VII knows there's a scene in which a character that would not be normally be seen wearing a dress is wearing a dress, and that scene in the game is by far my favorite thing. It might be my single favorite scene of any game last year. Just in a vacuum, it was so much sheer fun
It's
and just
worn well.
insanity.
It's
And
worn
it's
well.
earned. It's earned. It's earned insanity. And I have a feeling when Wyatt gets to that moment where
He's
we're
not
gonna
gonna
hear
like
back is that was dumb.
Guys, that wasn't funny at all. Meanwhile, it's like the funniest line delivered in the last like 5 to 10 years of anything.
I can't wait. I'm so excited to see Wyatt's take on Final Fantasy VII. And of course, he managed to spoil himself on the one thing we warned him not to spoil himself on by looking up videos on the
Oh
internet.
no! Wait. One specific thing having to do with the original?
Yeah,
Or
with the original.
Okay.
Because
Really?
one of the reasons we tried to get Wyatt to play FF7 Remake is he doesn't know the major spoiler. I'm not going to say it in case
The
anyone
thing that everyone knows, though.
wants to play the game and
Yeah.
hasn't played FF7 or
It's-
the remake. There's a major spoiler that is equivalent to the Luke is Darth Vader's son Star Wars spoiler for video games. And
There's
so
more-
everyone knows it.
There's more behind it though. So if he just got the surface level of that done, I think he's still okay.
Yeah, he's still fine because remake is weird, but it is a shame that went in. He's now going in with tainted expectations,
Believe it.
and will likely be surprised.
Oh, wait. So he doesn't know about the
Yeah,
remake.
he doesn't know what the
Just-
remake differences are.
Perfect.
At all. So
Perfect.
I am excited to see his reactions. I mean, I'm sure he'll give us a fully written out book report on Final Fantasy VII if he finishes it or stops playing at some point. He's startlingly
That'll be
far
interesting.
along in.
Yeah.
So I think he might finish it, but we'll see. We'll see.
I hope so.
All right. So with that, unfortunately, Wyatt likes shoutouts. And you know what that means? We can't do something that Wyatt actively likes on this episode. So we are doing shout nots.
Oh,
Shout ins.
shout ins. Whisper ins.
Oh my
Ugh.
god.
Now,
Oh, no.
what this is just, I want you to all call out something that you just despise irrationally. Preferably related to games or media that we've kind of talked about. And this can be a bad take. In fact, it should be a bad take.
It wouldn't be the Wyatt episode if it wasn't a bad take.
Because if Wyatt might have bad takes, but one thing we know about Wyatt is that he hates bad takes.
Yep.
So-
Yep. Oh god, I gotta think of a bad
Ooh.
take now.
So Wyatt, I got a bad take for you that I think you're gonna, if you ever listen to this, deeply feel offended at, and that is that I fundamentally disagree that the linearness of Final Fantasy VII Remake and JRPGs in general and the level design is a problem. I just don't think it matters. It's not the point of the game. It doesn't do anything for it. Being a better level doesn't matter because all you're gonna do is go to a corner and hit an enemy anyway. What's the difference? It doesn't matter.
God. Oh my god.
Oh.
All right, who's ready next with their shout not? I can also say, here's a better shout not. The censoring Miranda in the Mass Effect Legendary Collection is not censorship. They're just changing a camera angle that was bad in the first game, and it was just not good, so they're changing it. But of course, media latched on to say it's censorship. It's not censorship. It's changing bad design. Actually, that's not really a bad take, though. That's a pretty good take. So
That is a good take. How dare you actually make a shout out?
no, that wasn't a shout out. It was still negative.
These shout-ins are hard to come up with.
I know, because my
my
brain has
God.
built up a walls to protect myself from having things that I would consider to be hot takes.
God.
I know one of you is ready. One of you's got a burning hot take.
I can
Hot
try
shouting.
something.
Go ahead. Hit
I
us
can
with
try.
it.
I can try something.
Just
the half.
anything that Wyatt would find personally offensive.
Oh. It doesn't have to do with games.
Oh, that's fine.
The half pretzel, half cracker Ritz are superior.
Wow.
Oh,
Wow. Now that is a hot take.
I'm clutching my chest in sheer shock and terror. Oh my lord.
Brad, you got to top that somehow. I don't know if you can, but
I certainly can't top it, but I am required to give the last one. So I will double down on what I said before. That I don't care if I am truly, you know what, and I will quadruple down and make this even bigger than what I was originally going to say.
all right.
Anytime that you boil down anything in a game to just say, oh, well, it's just this, what is wrong with you? Everything is just something. Everything is just pressing buttons. Everything is just a thing on a screen, okay? You say that, oh, well, this isn't, like, this doesn't make any sense. How would you think this is fun? This is just pressing a button at a time or whatever. Yeah, well, everyone's favorite thing to do in Dark Souls parrying is just pressing a button at a right time, too. And it's fun! It doesn't matter if it's just something. Everything is just something.
Do you know what you are, buddy? You're just a speck of dust in the universe.
And do you know what this is?
Different to you.
And do you know what this is? This is the outro playing as we finish the episode and tell you all to listen to our podcast 7 a.m. on Tuesday mornings or live, generally Sunday nights, occasionally Monday nights, but generally Sunday nights at 8-ish p.m. Eastern. Watch the show, follow the socials that are in the description, all that yada yada yada. Have fun.